This is Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. Just a note before this next conversation, it will include discussion about sexual assault of minors. In May, King County prosecutors filed sexual assault charges against a King County sheriff's deputy. They said Ricardo Cueva raped a 17-year-old girl. Prosecutors claim the abuse started while the two were alone on a ride-along in his police SUV while she was participating in Explorers, a youth mentorship program with the Burien Police Department. And that allegation mirrors a disturbing pattern of abuse within Explorers programs at law enforcement agencies nationwide. Lakeidra Chavis is a former reporter with the Marshall Project, a nonprofit news organization covering the U.S. criminal justice system. And Lakeidra has been covering the Explorers program for years. She's here with more on what happened here and patterns she has found within this system. Lakeidra, welcome to Soundside. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
So prosecutors filed this case against a King County sheriff's deputy in May. The alleged victim says the abuse took place in 2017 and 2018. And she came forward with this information last year when she's into her 20s now. Can you give us an overview of this case first? Because, we're based here in Seattle, so this has local implications for us. What happened here with the deputy's alleged misconduct? What does the prosecutor's case look like?
Yeah, so the survivor, as you mentioned, she is in her mid-20s now. She came forward to report this abuse that had occurred when she was still a teenager, participating in the King County Sheriff's Office's Explorer program. And this particular deputy was based out of the Burien station. And she came forward in part because she wanted to ensure that other participants were safe from the abuse that she says she suffered from Deputy Cueva. And this abuse that prosecutors say occurred, that they lay out in charging documents, allegedly began on a ride-along when Cueva began making inappropriate comments to her when they were alone in his vehicle, and that progressed to several instances of abuse, including rape. Cueva has denied these allegations, and his attorneys maintain his innocence and say they intend to thoroughly investigate his case and to defend him vigorously. He is set to go to trial in October.
What is the Explorers program, and why do so many police departments participate in it?
Yeah, so the Explorers program is, to put it very simply, a youth program, and it's a vocational program that's existed for decades, and it actually was created by Scouting. Modern day exploring programs were seen as a way to have more girls and young women participate in Scouting programs, and they are available in lots of different career fields, including journalism, including EMS, including fire departments, engineering departments, and education fields as well. But they are especially popular among law enforcement agencies. This includes police departments, sheriff's offices, even the U.S. Custom and Border Patrol. And the problem that I have found through this reporting is that there is a history of sexual abuse and misconduct allegations in law enforcement agencies specifically. And this is a program, again, that is meant to encourage young people to learn about different career fields that they might pursue, including in policing. And so you have, what I found in this reporting, participants who are as young as 14 who join these programs, really excited to learn about policing. They may even be in their Explorer posts for years, and then they face, abuse or grooming. And it completely not only affects their mental health and as they move into adulthood, but it also, for many of them and many survivors that I have spoken to, ruins their dream of becoming a police officer.
So this is a program that Scouting America runs in different communities across the country, or is it actually being run by the police department specifically when you talk about, say, an Explorers program at the Burien Police Department?
Scouting America created the program. They offer a youth protection training that law enforcement agencies, the advisors in the program, they're required to take this training as a part of preventing child sexual abuse in scouting programs. They also, have memorandums of understandings that law enforcement agencies are supposed to sign. But when it comes to the day-to-day operations of the program and of the posts, that is really up to law enforcement agencies. So what we found is that it is really variable in terms of how the programs are run, in terms of which department might have the correct paperwork or the most up to date paperwork. It's just all over the place.
And you report that the King County case is one of 4 across the country going to trial this year that involves a police officer allegedly abusing a minor in a vehicle. What does the King County case tell you about what's going on around the country and the history here?
Yeah. So one of the things that really stood out when I was reading the charging documents is the pattern that takes place with this abuse, especially when it's on ride alongs. Prosecutors lay out in this case that the survivor went on a ride along. The officer, as we talked about earlier, began making inappropriate comments, and that just progressed. And, the abuse took place in isolation. And this kind of struggle that the survivor experienced, where this officer was viewed by his supervisors, by his colleagues, in a respectable way. The charging documents even include that this officer received a Burien Officer of the Year at the time that he was allegedly abusing this, now young woman. And that it was just an incredibly horrible experience. And what happened, what is alleged to have happened to her, has happened to so many victims of alleged abuse and misconduct in Explore programs. And that the pattern of how this occurred is shockingly similar, despite different law enforcement agencies, despite it being a different place in the country completely, and despite different decades. That a case that might have happened in the 70s and 80s. The pattern of the abuse is remarkably similar decades later, and I think that is just it's just been really unfortunate to see.
And the commonality that you've zeroed in on is a high percentage of these alleged abuse incidents happen in ride-alongs. How are kids riding along with officers solo if there are safety policies in place, according to Scouting America, according to the Explorers program, that you're never supposed to have an adult and a child or adult and children alone, that you're supposed to have multiple adults present? How did these kids end up alone in the cars with these officers that allegedly abused them?
Yeah. Well, let's start with the big picture and kind of walking through what a ride along is. People might remember it from watching like cop shows, but simply put, ride alongs are when a participant, again, sometimes as young as 14 years old, can accompany an officer while they are on patrol in their vehicle. And this can be for hours at a time. If a participant is 18 or older, they can do overnight ride alongs. So this is, in the early morning hours. And this is a key perk of the program. Scouting even acknowledges this. This is sometimes the only reason that young people want to join their local Explorer posts, so they can go on ride-alongs, because it's viewed as very exciting. And despite this being the case, and despite this history of problems with the program, Scouting carved out an exception to its safety policies for ride-alongs. So if anyone listening, is familiar with Scouting safety policies, there are 2 big ones. One is a 2 deep leadership rule requiring that 2 adults be present for programming. And the other is a no one-on-one contact rule, which means that an adult cannot be alone with a participant. And Scouting, up until very recently, had carved out an exception for decades, which allowed for ride-alongs in law enforcement Explorer programs an officer to be alone with a participant as they went on a ride along. And, at the time this story published, I had found almost 220 allegations of abuse and misconduct, and a quarter of those included abuse and misconduct that occurred on a ride along because this isolation was occurring.
But you know that might be an undercount because there are many of the cases of alleged abuse that you were not able to locate. You were not able to confirm a location for. While you were reporting this article, police ride-alongs and the policy that Scouting America and Explorers had allowing this one-on-one ride-along situation, that ended, right? How did you hear about that, and what do we know about the reason for that change?
Yes, beginning around mid-June, I sent my findings to Scouting America and requested a comment, requested an interview, really wanting to understand why was this policy exception in place, and to get the response to what seemed to be a very large percentage of abuse allegations happening because of ride-alongs. They did not respond, but I found out in early August that they had changed this rule exception, that it was no longer in place, that they were going to start requiring that two officers be present for ride-alongs, two officers in the vehicle. And that if one of the participants is female, that one of the officers in the vehicle also be female. We reached out to Scouting to try to get a better understanding of this policy change. They did not respond to our requests. But one thing that I found very interesting is that although Scouting's policy change is dated June 10th, so before I reached out to them with our findings, it was not on their website until late June. In addition to this, I had also made some calls trying to get a sense of if police departments and sheriff's offices were aware of this rule change. They were not. So I think there are more questions just in terms of the awareness of this policy change, which seems to be pretty major, but also the degree to which law enforcement agencies can even implement it.
So law enforcement agencies really use this and see this as a good recruiting tool to show young people the possibilities of a career in law enforcement, to make them more aware of what goes into policing. And either that kid maybe will pursue a career in law enforcement, or they will at least have a better understanding of their local practices. But this is a broader program. I mean, you mentioned that there are explorers programs in engineering companies and, in other types of healthcare professions, things like that. Do we have any indication that there is a problem with abuse in those types of explorer programs, or does it seem to be centered on the policing programs specifically?
It's really hard to know the degree to which sexual abuse and misconduct is common in other Explorer programs. And that is largely in part because the reporting that I've done is really dependent on public records. So that can include internal investigations of officers. It can include charging documents. It can include newspaper archives, all things that really anyone can access through public means. So if this is an issue in other types of Explorer programs, I just don't know. But I will say I spoke with some advisors, one of a journalism Explorer post and one from an engineering exploring post out of Lockheed Martin. And they were very, very surprised to hear about the rule exception that had been made for law enforcement exploring. And they even talked about, for instance, for the engineering post, the advisor talked about how parents are welcomed, to observe the programming, which stood out to me because what I've heard from survivors is that not only is there isolation, but they felt like their parents could not be there with them during the programming. And
at the law enforcement agencies.
Yes, at the law enforcement agencies. So it's just interesting to hear that not only are other advisors and different types of Explorer posts unaware of this policy change, but there's a different culture in terms of how the programs run as well.
And just for going forward on different types of youth programs, what are the best practices that you heard from experts when it comes to running youth programs and keeping kids safe?
What I heard when I spoke to experts who are focused on preventing child sexual abuse and youth programming specifically, is that isolation is not a good thing, that you should not have situations in which an adult is alone with a participant. It makes participants very, very vulnerable. And this goes back to ride-alongs as well. There is isolation, and also that if there is going to be any interaction, that interaction needs to be observed by a third party. So someone essentially that can intervene if something inappropriate is beginning to occur. And when it comes to the Scouts changing their policy, one thing that experts really cautioned against, which may be surprising for some listeners, is that a one-size-fits-all approach may not be the most effective for law enforcement exploring. So even though there's now a policy in place requiring two adults to be present, not allowing that one-on-one contact anymore, there may be other issues inherent to policing that might make that rule difficult for agencies to follow. For instance, a lot of agencies might not have the staffing to have two officers in the vehicle to go on patrol. And, in addition to this, a lot of agencies may not have as many women officers that can accompany a female participant. So, again, I think there are additional questions based on conversations I've had with researchers that might need to be asked in terms of the Law Enforcement Explorer programs moving forward.
When it comes to Law Enforcement Explorer programs specifically, I mean, you're not only talking about people who are in positions of authority, but officers are also the people that you're supposed to call when something goes wrong, when somebody victimizes you or hurts you. What did you hear from experts or, from victims that makes this specifically hard to process, that makes these conditions specifically difficult when it comes to abuse within Explorers programs at police departments?
What I've heard from survivors, and I just want to say there are survivors who are in their 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s, is that when the person who is victimizing you is a police officer, it is very difficult to process who you go to for help, because we have been taught since an early age that you go to the police when you need help. So I think that is a very, very difficult issue to navigate in terms of reporting. And experts have brought this up as well, that when the person who is hurting you is a trusted adult with power, so not just, law enforcement officers, but maybe someone who is higher up in the church or some other respected institution, that it makes it very, very difficult. But what I will say is that in the cases that I've reviewed, even in the case involving the King County Sheriff's Office, is that when survivors decide to report, that they usually do go to a trusted adult or a trusted friend, someone who can advocate for them and help them as they begin to navigate the process of reporting the officer.
Lakeidra Chavis is a former reporter with the Marshall Project, which is a nonprofit news organization covering the U.S. criminal justice system. Lakeidra, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. And hey, this show is only possible because listeners support us. If you are able to give right now, check out the show notes for a link to donate. And don't forget, you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m., Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org.